At the edge of a forgotten countryside stands Ashvale Hall, an ancestral mansion inherited by Ashton Boston, a reclusive and eccentric billionaire. Now 75 and battling a terminal illness, Ashton has no children, no known relatives, and no heirs. But before his impending death, he wishes to pass on his wealth and possibly something darker. Enter Jane Holloway, his loyal but secretive assistant of over 2 decades. Jane steps into Ashton's dimly lit chamber, ancient portraits watching her every move. "I've shortlisted a few candidates who look perfect as your kingdom's next successor," she says, presenting dossiers of 5 strangers. They are all orphans, each with peculiar histories, mirrored traumas, recurring nightmares, and a strange birthmark resembling the family crest of the Boston lineage. Ashton, whose illness grows more violent with each passing day, agrees to invite the 5 to Ashvale Hall under the pretense of a mysterious inheritance challenge. But Jane knows the truth. Ashton is not merely looking for someone to inherit his wealth, he's searching for a vessel. A successor not just of his estate, but of his soul. As the 5 candidates settle into the decaying mansion, supernatural phenomena begin to unfold. Mirrors whisper secrets, hallways shift overnight, and each guest begins to question their sanity. Over the course of 5 days, Ashton Boston, despite his frail state, personally interviewed each of the 5 candidates. The meetings took place in the Crimson Room, a vaulted chamber filled with taxidermy and rotting books, where the air always seemed too still. He asked them strange yet pointed questions. How often do you dream? Do you eat red meat? Would you say you have a strong pain threshold? If a shadow followed you for a week, would you confront it or ignore it? Do you believe the soul can change homes? The candidates were unsettled, unsure if Ashton's mind had deteriorated or if the questions had deeper meaning. One by one, they left the room visibly shaken, except for one. Kilo, a soft-spoken young man in his early 30s with piercing eyes and a calm demeanor, answered every question with eerie composure. He mentioned his strict vegetarian diet, daily cold plunges, lucid dreams since childhood, and a peculiar comfort with pain. He even confessed, with a slight grin, that he'd always felt like someone else was watching from inside him, like a twin who never got born. Ashton smiled for the first time in months. "You're the one," he whispered. Jane narrowed her eyes. She didn't like Kilo. There was something familiar about him, something that didn't belong. That night, Kilo was moved into the Black Room, a chamber directly beneath Ashton's quarters, its walls carved with runes and veiled behind heavy red curtains. Jane protested privately to Ashton, but he dismissed her, saying, "The house has chosen." What Jane didn't know was that Kilo had been hearing the house too. He had dreams of hallways that didn't exist and knew the layout of the place before ever seeing it. On the second night, he found the door to the sealed east wing unlocked and stepped in as though returning home. That's when the spirits began to stir. The morning sun filtered weakly through the stained glass windows of Ashvale Hall as Ashton sat propped up in his chair, oxygen tubes draped over his face. His skeletal fingers clutched a fountain pen as his lawyers slid the final stack of papers before him. With trembling hands, he signed over everything: the estate, the offshore accounts, the private collection of relics, even the hall itself, to one name: Kilo Morin. The lawyers, unnerved by the man's presence but bound by discretion, left shortly after. One of them whispered to the other, "There's something wrong in that place. That boy, did you see his eyes?" That afternoon, Ashton summoned Jane to his chamber. His voice, though faint, was heavy with urgency. "It's time. Prepare the ritual. The full moon rises in 2 nights. I want the transfer complete before the next cycle begins." Jane hesitated. "You're sure about Kilo?" Ashton turned his gaze toward her with a look that froze her breath. "He is ready. The vessel is strong. My soul won't scatter this time." Jane nodded and left, though unease writhed in her gut like a snake in a sack. She descended into the cellar of veils, where the old texts and ceremonial tools were stored behind locks and bone-laced wards. She began gathering the items for the ritual: candles dipped in blood wax, salted obsidian daggers, the hourglass made from his great-grandfather's spine. Meanwhile, Kilo sat in the black room, unmoving, his hands resting on the arms of the antique chair. He hadn't slept, yet his eyes showed no fatigue. When Jane walked past his door, she paused. Something made her spine itch. Inside, Kilo whispered to the empty room, "Let him come. I've waited long enough." What neither Ashton nor Jane knew was that Kilo had been born during a blood moon, and that his real name wasn't Kilo, it was Kylon, a vessel created not to receive a soul, but to consume one. And Ashton had just signed over more than his fortune. He had signed over his fate. Jane had prepared everything in the crucible room, a forgotten chamber deep beneath the estate, carved into the earth centuries ago. The floor was marked with ancient sigils, the air heavy with incense and burnt marrow. 5 candles flickered around the circle of transfer, their flames unnaturally still. Ashton arrived in his wheelchair, draped in ceremonial robes, stitched from the hair of the first Boston heir. He was pale, sunken-eyed, but a feverish light burned within him. Kilo followed behind him, silent, barefoot, eyes closed, as though he were sleepwalking. He stepped into the center of the circle, opened his eyes, and looked directly at Jane. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low, like more than one voice speaking at once. Jane froze. Something inside her, the thing she had suppressed for decades. She wanted to stop the ritual. She wanted to scream. But Ashton had begun the chant. He held the obsidian dagger to his palm, drawing blood and feeding it to the vessel bowl at the circle's edge. He spoke the ancient words of his bloodline, commanding the transference of spirit, willing his soul to shift from decaying flesh into the youthful body of Kilo. The candles flared. Kilo's head jerked back. A wind screamed through the chamber, though no doors were open. Then a long silence. Ashton's body slumped. Kilo collapsed to his knees. Jane stepped forward, trembling, whispering, "Ashton?" Kilo looked up slowly and smiled. But it wasn't Ashton's smile, and it wasn't Kilo's either. "You old fool," he hissed. "You opened the door for me." Jane backed away. "You're not him." "No, Ashton is gone. I devoured him, as he devoured others before me, but I am older than him, older than this house." Kilo rose to his feet, his eyes now fully black, swirling with shadows. The runes on the floor began to smolder, cracks formed in the stone. The mansion groaned above them. "I am the debt your bloodline owed. I am the curse your ancestors buried in flesh and fortune. And now, I am free." Jane turned and ran, but behind her the ground cracked open, and the screams of the damned echoed from the depths. Ashvale Hall would not survive the night. Subscribe for more.